All right, so I welcome each and everyone again to today's session on the Python basics. So I'd like to start and we can begin. John, I'm not able to share my screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
All right, so yesterday we did a number of steps and we ended up with our last topic on data types. Today we'll be looking at Python. We'll be starting from the Python type conversions and moving downwards. All right. Let me see this file first. So I'm just saving my file as the 2.py so that we'll be able to do our Python stuff in there. Okay, so when we talk about type conventions in Python, it's just about we being able to change one data type to another. Probably you have a string, you want to convert that string into an integer, or you might have an integer whereby you would want to convert that integer into a float. And there are times whereby you get data, and then the data that you have the data coming as strings, even though they are numbers. So when you have to perform some calculations, you need to use type conversions in there to be able to have your string numbers as integers or floats, so that you'll be able to use them, do your calculations. So in Python, there are two types of conversions, or there are two ways that you can have your conversions. We have one that is implicit, and then we have one that is explicit. So with the implicit one, we have Python automatically converting a data type for us. So you can have an integer 1, whereby you are adding it to a float. Once I save and I run this, I have 2.0. So in here, we have an integer plus a float, and our output is a float. Let's print the data type. So I have to copy this out. Put this in here. This here. Type. We have our class, our data type to be of the class floats now. So this is the implicit way in which Python itself does the type conversions for us, so that there's going to be this kind of consistency in whatever you're doing. And there is another way whereby you would have to do it implicitly. An example maybe you have, I just have the number 1. I don't want to use 1 as an integer. I want to use 1 as a float now. So what I can do about that is to call the float and then wrap it around my variable called 1. Once I run this, my 1 is no longer an integer, it is now a float. In like manner, you might have a list. You might have a list 1, 2, 3, and then you might want to change that list into a tuple. You use the tuple class, you wrap it around your list objects, and then you run it. And then it changes to your list, which is a face bracket, to now a tuple being bordered by parentheses. So these are some few examples with the type conversion. So you can convert your data from strings to integer or integer to string, from list to tuple or tuple to list. And same with sets. You can do those type of conversions in Python. So that's with the type conversions. So this is an example of the explicit whereby we are actually calling the class that we want to convert the data type into. And this is an example of the implicit where we didn't mention or call the type, but Python automatically did it for us dynamically. Okay, we can move on. Our next topic is Python. Let's start with Python inputs. So with Python inputs also, what you want to have is that there are times that you design a program or you have a script that does something particular for you, but you would also want that script to be able to get an input from a customer or a user. If you want to do something like that, then there has to be some kind of function that is able to get the values from the users and then use that value for whatever you want to do in your application. And the function that Python uses, or the method that Python uses for it, is the input keyword. So Python uses this input keyword to be able to accept inputs from users into Python. So let's have a look at an example. So I've just created an input. I'm saying that, okay, what do I want to be the description to which I want the user to give me the value for? So I want the user to type in his or her name. So I've just written that description in here so that once the user sees type your name in here, the user will type something. And then the next thing that I want to do is to be able to output whatever the user types in here. Unfortunately, usually when you do this and you run it, you usually don't have your output in Sublime. Well, let's see. So Sublime doesn't give you the output. So what you can do is you can go into your terminal. If you're on Windows, you can just go to your start menu and then you type the CMD. And then you type your CMD. I'm on Mac, so I just click on the terminal and then I have it open. So you can click on your command prompt, CMD, or your Mac or your terminal if you're on Ubuntu or Mac. Well, then the next thing you want to do is to type Python because you already have Python installed on your program. I have to go to my desktop. To come into my desktop, search for day 2. So this is my day 2 file. Then I drag it in here. Then you click enter. Sorry, so I have Python 3 installed. So the line of code that I entered, type your name in here, has been stated in here. All I have to do is to type my name. Then we see what comes next. I type in Jed, and then the output has been printed for me. I have Jed in here. So based on how you'd want to have your script running, you can add more statements in there. And then you decide the flow control of those statements. If you're using VS Code or PyCharm, you wouldn't have to go into your terminal and do all of that. Once you run it, and type in your value in here, you should have the response popping up. This is for only those using Sublime. Sublime doesn't automatically build your input outputs for you. So what you have to do is, once you are done with your input line of code in here, you just have to drag your Py file into your terminal. You start by Python 3, so it understands that it's coming to run a Python code. And then you just add your file to it. You click enter, then it runs the output for you. So in a nutshell, this is just how Python takes in inputs. And what you can do is, there are times that your inputs, you might want to take your inputs as strings and then later convert it to integer also. That is also allowed. So let's look at an example of that. Okay, so what do I want to do? I'll type in your name. Let me add numbers. It's meant saying my age. The file age in here. I want to cast this into an untier. All I want to do is print. I want to print my age and type my age. So you can say hello. We want to use string formatting in here. Say okay. So in a nutshell, I've created an input that accepts the name. I've created another input that is going to accept my age. And what I wanted to do is that once I get an input from the user giving me his or her name, I'd want to ask the user by specifying the user's particular name and then asking the user to put in his name, his age. Once he gives me the age, because we are receiving it probably as strings, we want to now cast it explicitly into an integer, or we can also do it into a float if we choose to. But for now, we are using the integer to see how it pans out. Okay, so I've saved my file. I have to go back to my terminal. Then do the same thing again, Python 3, and then I just copy and drop. I just drag my day2 file in there. Type in Jet, and now the response is hello Jet. Type in hello Jet, type your age in here. I'm gonna type my age 23. And then the next output is, okay, I'm 23, and then the 23 is of the class int. So that's just about that. All right. John, is it, can we take questions as we go, or we should complete and take questions?
I think we shouldn't complete, like where you've gotten to, let's find out what issues they have, and if they are okay, then can proceed. So that we don't lack a lot of things together.
Okay, sure. All right, so I think 7 with 1, your hand is raised up. Yeah, sorry that. And you can go over the inputs. Okay. All right, so I was saying that. Okay. So let's take it this way, that you're in a business, we're having a conversation, right, on a topic, and I ask you, okay, Frank, can you give me your inputs? So you, Frank, you are now coming to give me your inputs, and whatever input you are about to give me, I'm going to work with that input. And you gave me your inputs, and I received your inputs. Receiving your input means me listening to you. That is how we do it as humans. But now we want to do the same thing programmatically. So we are saying that Python has an inbuilt function that is able to listen to the inputs of users. And what we want to do is to be able to receive the inputs that are coming from our users. So if we want to receive that input, then we have to know the defined functions in Python that allows us to do that. And the defined keyword in there that allows us to do that is this input keyword here. So when you call this input keyword, it allows you to have that flexibility of receiving inputs from your users or whomever is going to use your system or your application, or whomever you want to receive that input from. Now, I've given a description in here to let the user know the kind of input that I want from him or her, and that is to type in the name. Once the user reads this, the user knows that, okay, I'm supposed to enter my name, and the user enters his name. This keyword over here now receives that name, and then based on what you want to do with the inputs, you put in that lines of code or statements, and then Python works with that for you. For this particular scenario, we are getting the input, the name, and then what we are doing is that in here, we want to receive another input. That input is the age. But I want to be able to talk to the person, make the person feel like I'm specifically talking to the person. So I want to mention the user's name in my description to the next input I want from him. So what I went on to do was then to take the user's name. You realize that when we receive his name, we already learned about variables. We we put his name into this variable called my input. And because his variable, whenever we call the variable, this variable my input, the input that we received from our user now appears. We call that my input in here, meaning that anytime I run this line of code, it is going to appear as hello. The name that the user is going to put in is going to come as hello. The name the user puts in, type your age in here. The user being me, Jed. I entered my name, Jed, so it's going to read as hello, Jed. Type your age in here. If you entered Frank, you are going to receive an output saying, hello, Frank, type your age in here. And then the next thing we wanted to do was to be able to find out how we'll be able to convert the data type we received from the user. So we are assuming that the data type we are receiving is a string, and then we want to cast it into an integer. So in casting it, we call the integer keyword around our input value that we are receiving, which is this. We wrap the int over it like we've done already in here, whereby we wrap our tuple over the list and then we wrap the float over the integer value. We do same in here, and then we are able to cast or type convert our age into an integer. I hope that is clearer. Okay,
I think that should be fine.
Come again.
Okay, you can continue. Yeah, I wanted to say maybe there's no other question. I don't know.
All right. So Isaac, you are having an issue with your Sublime popping up as unregistered. Mine also pops up as unregistered. Just close that pop-up that appears and just continue using it. That shouldn't be much of a problem. You can just close it. Okay. Let's move on then. So we've learned about inputs, how Python accepts inputs. We are already using Python outputs. There are two ways that Python gives us outputs. One is by using the return value, the return word from our functions. And then the other is by using the print keyword. So we use the print keyword to receive outputs. And also we use the return in Python to return an output or to break a function. So these are the two ways that we are able to receive outputs in Python: return and print. So let's look at it. We've already looked at print. Let's look at return. So assuming we have a function, let's see. Find identity name. What I want to define. Receive a name, right? Find identity name. Let's just put in a name. Once I call this function that I've defined, and I put in my name, okay. Let's use the return. Okay. All right, so I'm not having that output. So what I usually do is, I don't know if it's the case of Sublime, but there are times I have this issue. So what I usually do is just to wrap print around this print output. But usually what the return over here is going to do is it's going to get the value that you put in here, and it's going to return it by using this return name. Like the name suggests, return is going to come back to you with an output value. So if you are on VS Code, I think your return should be able to give you some value, or Python. That's just the case of Sublime. Okay. Let's just do this. I didn't want to use the print again. Yeah. So the return is returning our name, and we are receiving the name to the variable called A, and we are just printing it out. Just to make it clearer for those who are watching. So in a nutshell, Python outputs print, return, you receive an output from Python. The next thing on our list has to do with Python operators. Okay, so when we talk about Python operators has to do with these symbols that we have in Python that are used for performing operations in Python, and these operations may include arithmetic operations, logical operations, comparisons, and those sort of manipulations. So with our arithmetic ones, we can have the plus, plus, minus, we have modulo, we have divide, we have division, we have multiplication, and then we have raising to the power. So we already know what a plus sign do. The plus sign is used to perform additions. Minus is used to perform subtractions. This modulo sign allows us to be able to get the remainder of a division. So usually when you perform a division, we want to, when you use the modulo, it specifically gets the remainder, the remaining outputs from a division. This division just gives you a division and returns it in, say, decimals or floats. A float division is always going to round your division to the nearest integer or whole number. And then we have the star standing or indicating multiplication, and then double star indicating raising to the power. So these are a few of the arithmetic operations. We have the logical symbols being equate to, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, or greater than, less than. These are some of the logical. Hey, I said logical. These are for the comparison, and the logical has to do with, you can also use this for the logical, but they usually have to do with using the if statements in there also. Yeah, that's if I remember correctly. Yeah, but we have this for making comparisons in Python, these symbols or operators for making comparisons in Python. And then you have these symbols for performing those kind of arithmetic operations in Python. So to quickly look at some few examples, we can create a variable called my add, and then we can say 2 plus 3. And then what we want to do is to be able to print the output of this operation. And we have 5. So that's an example of the addition. We can look at an example of the subtraction. So my sub should be 5 minus 3. We want to print our operation. We have 5 minus 3 giving us 2. We can go downwards to have multiplication. We can do 2 times 2. And then we want to print the result of our operation. 2 times 2, we have 4. Okay, let's try the modulo and see. My mode should be equal to 2 modulo 2. Print my mode. Then we have 2 modulo 2 giving us 0 as the remaining value that you get from 2 divided by 2. My division should be 4 divided by 2. We want to print this output. My div, we save it and then we run it. And we have the single division sign giving us 2.0 down here. And let's try the floor division. So the double division sign is called floor division. Okay. So with the floor division, we still have 4 divided by 2, 4 divided by 2, but we have one returning the value as a float, and then the other returning the value as an integer. And then the last being the exponents. Raising to the power of exponents. That should be 2 raised to the power 2 or 2 exponent 2. And this, and then 2 raised to the power 2 is going to give us 4. 2 raised to the power 3. Is going to give us 8. So these are a few examples of these operations. Comments them. And lest I forget, yes, lest I forget, there is one type of data type also that I don't think that we looked at yesterday. And that has to do with the Boolean data type. The Boolean data type returns true or false for they come in true or false. So an example can be, we want to just print 4 is greater than 2. It's giving us true, 4 greater than 2 true. And it's giving us true because 4 is indeed greater than 2. When we keep this, let's use 4 is less than 2, and it should give us false. So this is the Boolean data type whereby it returns true or false for us. Okay, so before I go for it, what is the purpose of the F before the hello? All right, so the purpose of this F stands for string formatting. String formatting it's a way of formatting your string. So what we have in here is a string, but we want to add some form of values that have their own. We want to add some form of value in here. The values come in a way we can say that they are in a way of objects. So we want to add variables to our string. So for us to do that, we'll have to format the string to be able to take in the variables that we want to add to the string in here. So assuming I wasn't using this variable in here, I wouldn't have added this F in here. So the F allows us to be able to format our string to take in variables. And assuming I didn't, so you'd have to put these curly brackets around your variables also. That's just the syntax for the string formatting. There are, I think, 3 ways to go about it. There's another way where you use, okay, let's just look at it shortly. So what we want to do is that we want to print a string to give me an example of a list. So I need an example of a list and I need to print this out. I already have an example of a list in here, but this is a variable and our output has to be a string. So I need to format my string the string I have here. What I can do is I can put F here. And then once I put a F, I call these 2 curly brackets and I wrap them over the list variable that I have in here. When I print this now, I should have give me an example of a list. And then I have that example of the list in here. Another way to do this would be leave here, empty. And can go formats. And then put this here. Run, this should also work. So you can either put your curly brackets in here. So your curly brackets here becomes a placeholder for whatever variable that you want to insert into your string. And the dot format is taking that value that you want to use in place of the placeholder in here. In like manner, we have our placeholder being the curly bracket, but with this particular format, we are directly inputting our variable or value into the placeholder using the F format here. So that's with string formatting. So the reason being, you can imagine, so with the same example that we're using for the inputs, let's say, okay, that's going to be complicated. But in a nutshell, this is how string formatting works. The syntax is to either use F and then you use the curly brackets and then you put in the value for the placeholder, or you can use dot formats and then you have your value that you want to input into the string and then the placeholder in here. Yeah, the session is being recorded, so you can get the you can get a recorded video on the page, and I think it is being streamed live also on YouTube, if I'm correct. Okay, so those are the only questions. Move on. Okay, so the last thing we were looking at was with the comparisons, right? We were looking at comparisons and also how using comparisons outputs the Boolean data type, which is true or false. All right. So I think that's basically what the operators are. There are other operators, but let's look at this for now, and you can deal with the others later on. Our next topic should be namespace. Namespace in Python. Namespace in Python. Oh, if we were to divide this two ways, it's going to be name and then the space for the name. So when we talk about namespace, we are talking about a collection. We are talking of a collection of names, and basically what we are dealing with is how we map names to the objects that are assigned to them. An example is we have my div to be a variable name here. Then we have our value here. Now, based on when we are dealing with namespace also, we have to bear in mind that there is a scope attached to it. Based on where I would have this div, it's going to give me the go ahead to be able to use that div, or it's going to give me an error saying that, okay, that div isn't defined or isn't reflected in this particular area. So with the namespace, we are talking of a collection of names, and then the particular space or the scope within which those names are made valid or active. So to look at a few. Okay. We only talk about two. We have the global namespace, and then we have the local namespace also. So define namespaces. We want to receive something, right? Which just brings let's say car is equal to Volvo. This brings this. Let's come down. Let's call this namespace. Call it namespace. What we want to do is to be able to print car also. So first thing first. All right, so what I've done here is we are dealing with namespaces. I've already defined a car. I'm saying whenever I call car, Volvo should appear. So I've assigned the value Volvo to the variable car. Let's run this and see. So I have a name error. Name car is not defined, but we have this name car defined in here. We are having this error because of the namespace. We are talking about the scope within which this particular name car is being made valid or reflected. Now, the reason why it's appearing as not defined is because this car has been defined in a local scope. That local scope is this particular function. we are saying it's a local scope because in defining the function, this block of code over here makes everything in here local to this particular function name, meaning that everything you define within this block of code is not known to everything outside the block of code or this function. So these names or values in here thereby becomes local to this particular function. Now, assuming I come down here and then I define the car, then I say the car should be Toyota. Once I print it, I have the Toyota appearing because this car has been defined, and it has been defined in the global scope. Global scope because I defined this car outside the block, outside of a block of code. It wasn't within a particular function or block of code. It is outside a block of code. It thereby becomes a global scope or a global namespace, right? So I'm having the output Toyota in here. But what happens if I call this namespace? Let's comment the car here and let's print this namespace. Run it and see. So with the namespace, when I call these namespaces, you can see that I have car to be Volvo because I'm printing the car. So what is happening is that even though when I comment this Volvo, it is going to give me Toyota because this global scope is still made valid in the local scope. But then again, within this local scope, I can redefine what this car means to the local scope. So it's just like the way we have normal norms in society, but when you go deep down into maybe your tribe has what these norms means to them, which might be probably different from the general understanding of those norms. And when we drill down to families, also you might realize that there are certain things that have a different interpretation to your family than the normal interpretation that is known outside. So in the same manner, we have the global scope, we have the local scope, and you can redefine what you want your local scope variable to mean. So in a nutshell, with namespaces, we have the global scope, we have the local scope namespaces, and it's just a collection of names, and based on where and when you are calling that namespace, that particular variables or names is going to give you the outputs that reflects the scope within which it's in. John, please, which places would the video be posted? It's YouTube and the WhatsApp page, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I think I is streaming on YouTube, so maybe the WhatsApp page also can have it, the link to the video.
All right. So to the person who asks where the videos are going to be saved, it's on the streaming platform. All right. And let's move down to flow control. Flow controls, flow controls. All right. When we talk about flow control, that has the name might try to mean. We want to control the flow. So just as, for instance, you might have water, and then you might have water passing through a pipe hose, and you might want to direct the flow of that particular water, whether it goes into a tank or it goes into a gallon. You are the one who directs that flow of the water. In similar way, we want to direct the flow within which our code is going to work or is going to take. We want to have it in a particular flow or way. For us to be able to do that, we can use the if conditions or the loops. So we'll begin with if conditions. The syntax for the if conditions is if condition is true, then we want to do this, else do what is here rather. So what is going to happen is that when you write your if conditions, it's always going to take your first if condition first, and it is going to evaluate that condition. If that condition appears to be true, then it's going to come down to this block of code, and it's going to run this block of code, and it's going to jump this else condition. So just as you might do in your negotiations or your normal day-to-day activities where you give ultimatums or saying, if you give me this money, then I'll be able to render this service to you. Nevertheless, if you don't give me this money, then the service doesn't come. So what happens is that once the person gives you the money, that means that the initial condition has been met. So you are going to render the service onto the person. What happens is that the else statement, which is if the person doesn't agree to that condition, what happens becomes nullified because that person has agreed to the earlier condition that you stated. In a similar manner, it happens in here as such. But there might be times where you have multiple conditions that you want to give, saying something like, let's use, what example can we use? Probably let's use our school scores. So we want to say that if somebody gets 80 and above, that person has an A. If the person gets 70 to 80, that person has a B. But if the person gets 60 to 70, that person has a C. If the person gets from 50 to 60, that person has a D. So we have multiple conditions in here for us to be able to write our code such that we direct the flow based on the conditions that are being made. Would have to use a syntax like if condition. We want to do this. Elif condition. And then we want to use something like this. Elif condition. Then we use the else as the last resort. And save finally. This is a keyword. Say final to do. So assuming you have multiple conditions, those multiple conditions now have to occupy this line. You realize that I've repeated the elif twice, and then I've placed in here the condition that is to be met. So if you have 5 different or 7 different conditions, that means that you have elif appearing about 5 times. Yes, elif should appear about 5 times. Then the 2 that is left should be for the if, and then should be for the else. If you have your conditions being 10, the elif is going to appear 8 times, and then your if is going to be for the one of the two, and then your else is going to be for the other one of the two that is left. So let's have some examples to make it much more clearer. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So our first example, we want to use basic operations. We want to find out if 4 is greater than 2. And if 4 is greater than 2, then we want to have this output return for us. If 4 is not greater than 2, then we want to have this output return for us. We save it, we run it. So we have one output only appearing, which is the first statement, because the first statement equated to be true or the condition was meant. So once the first statement or the first condition was accessed and the condition was found to be true, it is going to run the block of code that is within that first condition, and is going to nullify all other conditions that are beneath it. Similar manner, if we are to change this condition, we save and then we run it, we realize that 4, we are saying that if 4 is less than 2, then it should print 4 is indeed greater. Forget about what is in here, but just think about this. If 4 is less than 2, then it should print this, else it should print this. Now, when the first condition was run, we found out that 4 isn't less than 2. So this statement isn't going to be run, it's going to be nullified because it doesn't hold to be true. What holds to be true is this statement, because that's our else value. Let's try the elif. Okay. So I run this, is going to be nullified. Come and check this before you go to go. Let's try this and see. So our first statement is going to be run. No, 4 is greater than 2, and 4 is not less than 2. So this condition is false. This condition doesn't hold to be true. So we jump it, we come to the next condition. We want to find the condition that is going to be true. And then we are asking in our next condition, is 4 equal to 4? Oh yes, 4 is equal to 4. So then we take this condition and then we run the lines of code or the statements in that particular block of code because the condition was found to be true. And then we nullify the rest of the conditions outside. So in a nutshell, that is just how the flow control works for if and then the elif conditions. Yeah. So basically we are done with the flow. control in terms of if conditions. What we want to look at now is for loops. We want to look at loops. When we talk about loops, it just means iteration, or we circling about a particular we circling about in a particular way, or we iterating around something over and over and over again. So we have loops in Python, and these loops are usually used for a collection of values or objects, where you have a collection of items that you want to loop over to be able to get each of those items or do other operations on those items. You can use the loops in there. There are two kinds of loops. We have the for loop, and then we have the while loop. The for loop is used when the length of your collection of items, where the length of your collection of items are definite, like you know the number. So let's say we have 14 fruits within a basket. Because I understand that we have 14 fruits within the basket, I might want to use the for loop because I know the definite number of items in there. So I can just use the for each of these fruits, within this basket, do this, and then it does that. But if I encounter the situation where I don't know the number of items in there, you can still go ahead and use the for loop, but usually you want to use the while condition, which states that if a condition, whilst a condition stands to be true, then continue to do this till that condition equates to be false. So we'll look at them briefly, and then hopefully we can end the class for today. Okay, so we are looking at for loops. We already have a collection of numbers. We want to loop through them. So the syntax for the for loop is for each item in the collection, you do something. So on a normal day, you have your for loop looking like this. For each item in collection, do something. So what is going to happen is that because we've written your for loop in this manner, it's going to go into your collection here, which is your basket, and it's going to take each of the items in that collection, and then it's going to do something with each of the items as you go through them one by one. That's just for the syntax. Now, if we want to write a for loop for our list, we are saying that for ASD standing for each item in let's see, which is my list that I've defined above already. I want to print each of the items in there. Now we've already established the fact that this ASD stands for each item. So let's just take this ASD and put it down here. What we are saying is for each item in our list, we want to print those items out. When we run it, we have 1, 2, 3, because they are the items in our list. Where is it? We have this list already defined here. And what we are doing is that we want to print each of the items in this list. So it takes 1, it takes 2, it takes 3. And that is what we have down here, written in 2 lines of code, and it's printing each of the lines for us. That's for the for loop. Quite easy. Now for the while loop, we want to have, then again, we are saying that with the while loop, we don't know, we don't have the definite length of our collection of items. We are going to base when we would want our loop to stop based on a condition that is evaluated to be true or false. Let me do this number. Number should be okay. Let's make number 0. Let's make number 0. We put number here, here, and here. Let's comment this out. Let's run this. Okay, so what we have here, we have a variable. That variable has a value 0. What we are saying is that whilst the number here, which is 0, continues to be less than 4, or while this number here, which is 0, continues to be less than 4, it should continue to do this, print this number for us. Yeah, it should continue to print this number for us. But the moment this number is greater than 4 or is equal to 4, it's going to break. So what happened was that this place, the first time we ran the number, it was 0, and 0 is less than 4. The condition is true. So, okay, then print that number for me. After printing the number, I went on to increment that particular value that is being held in the num, which is 0. So I added 1 to the 0. So num plus or equal to is a way of performing an addition and an assignment in a single line of code. I could have kept this like this, but I've said num should be equal to num plus 1. Right? I didn't want it this way. So another way to write it is just to bring the plus sign here, and then you have your plus equal to on the same line. Yeah. So the first time it was 0, we printed a 0, and then we added 1 to the 0. So now our num is no longer 0. It has now become 1. And then it runs through again. It gives us the value 1, because now that is 1, we print it and gives us 1. And then now we have 1 plus 1 giving us 2. So the next time it goes through here, since 2 is less than 4, it's going to print out the 2 for us. It comes down to this second line of code. And then it's going to be 2 plus 1 giving us 3. It's going to print out the 3 for us because 3 is less than 4. And then it comes down to the last line of code where it does 3 plus 1, which gives us the number 4. Now, when we come here, we have 4. So while 4 is less than 4, now 4 isn't less than 4, 4 is equal to 4. So this condition no longer holds, and then our function breaks because the condition no longer holds. So with the while conditions, there should always be a breaking point of your loop. There should be a breaking point within your loop. Other than that, your function will, your loop is going to keep running and be just writing numbers into your RAM till it gets full, and then your computer goes off or something. So with the while loops, there should always be a breakpoint. That breakpoint can be by having an increment value in your system, or by checking if that condition is met. You can just use the break value. So an example can be, I'm saying whilst num is less than 4, I want to say when num equals to 2. If num equals to 2, the next thing I want to do is to break this function. She should break this loop. When we run it, we only have 0 and 1. So this is another way for you to exit your loop. Either you perform an increment so that you'll be able to increment your value to its mix, so you have your condition to equate to false, or you equate your value to a specific value, and if that condition is met, you just use the break keyword to break that loop. So basically, we've done our for loops, and then we've also done our while loops. There is another thing that you can use when performing your loops, and we'll touch on that. We'll touch on continue, and we'll touch on pass, then we can end the class for today. So we use a pass when you want to say, oh, so pass is like have a freeway. So I don't want to just do anything, just pass. So let's look at an example of that. It has nothing, basically. So you want what you want to say that, okay, I want to look through my collection of items, but I just want to pass. It shouldn't do anything. It should just look through them and just do nothing. So we use the pass, just pass by. You want to just be passive within that particular line of code. Use the pass. So you use this in situations where you might have a loop that you'd want to write, whereby you want to say that if this condition is met, they should do this. But if that condition is not met, you don't want to do anything. So you just bring in the pass over there, because if that condition isn't met, you don't want to do anything. So you should just pass it. That's just one example or situation whereby you might want to use the pass. There is also the continue. So the pass just passes by. It's passive. It doesn't do anything active. There's also the continue, and the continue would allow you to break. It allows you to break the current situation that you are currently in, and then it continues with the rest of the iteration. Okay, so let me just change my lists. Okay, I think this is okay. Okay. I want to say you should look through if A is the one, so you should look through this list of mine. If A is the one, each of the items within that list is equal to banana. If it equates to banana, should just continue and do nothing. And that's am I using it correctly? Let's see. Let's see. Okay. So I have a list of fruits in here. What I want to do is I want to print each of the fruits within my list. But I'm saying that if any of the fruits that I access as I go into the basket of the fruits, if any of those fruits is equal to banana or is a banana, it shouldn't do anything. It shouldn't print it out. It should just jump it. It should continue with the iteration and just forget about that banana. So once it is equal to banana, these lines of code, all the lines of code that you may have here based on what you want to do, you might have multiple lines of code down here. If your fruit equates to banana, it's just going to continue the iteration and it's not going to run the rest of the lines of code beneath the continue. So that's just for how the continue works. So the continue is just going to break the current iteration that you are currently on and continue with the rest. With this break also, the break is going to terminate your loop whilst it is running. It is going to terminate it completely. And with the break also, you may have a nested loop. You're based on where your break is just going to break either the inner loop or the outer loop. Just in this fruits, the fruits here. And then that's is the 2, is the 3, is the 3. Okay. Is this what I want to do? Let's bring to is it true. let's print all fruits. Here's the 3 here. Then just take off some of the fruits. Let's change the location. This banana. Okay. All right. So what we have in here is that for each time that it loops through the fruits, it should print out the fruits. If it's banana, it should break. Now this break is only going to break this. So even though it's going to break this fruits portion, all the values within this ASD2 is still going to run. So you have the 1, 2, 3. If we have 1 million items, those 1 to 1 million is still going to run, even though we are breaking the for loop within this inner for loop. We bring the break here. Let's see what's going to happen. We'll comment this out. It is only going to print the first value within this list, which is whereby the first value is just 1. It's going to print the 1, and then it's going to run this for loop. It's going to give us the mango, banana, orange, cocoa. It's going to print them once, and then it breaks it. It doesn't run the 2 and then the 3. So based on where your break is, if it is in the outer loop, it's going to break your loops entirely. If it's in the inner loop, it's only going to break the inner loop whilst your outer loop continues to run. So that's just something to also look out for. Okay, I'm commenting the code using control with question mark. Control question mark should comment your code if you're on Windows or Ubuntu. If you're on Mac, command question mark should comment your code for you. Okay, so the indentation of the flow controls has to do with okay, all right. So there's something that we call indentation. Indentation is basically some amount of spaces that you leave after usually the colon sign. So you realize that when we use the while, there's a colon. When we are using the for loop also, there's a colon. When we are using the if condition, there's a colon. When you are using a function, we define a function somewhere. When we define this function, there's a colon. So the column always talks about, once you bring the column, the next thing that happens is an indentation. The indentation refers to the block of code that is local to that particular first line with the colon in there. What it does is that it allows whatever you are writing after the column, which is indented, only apply to that particular block of code. I don't know how to explain it better, but I hope it's clear. So basically, in Python, on a normal day, your indentation is going to be 4. If if you are writing and your code doesn't indent for you automatically, you have to count 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, and then you continue with your indented lines of code, or you can just click on tab and then it's automatically going to fall on the 4th space for you. You can change your indentation in Sublime Text by coming down to the tab size here. You click on it, and then you can change your indentation. Currently mine is on 4. You can change it to 2. If you change it to 2, you must make sure that you select your whole line of code and then change it, then it should reorganize your indentation for you, everything into true, so that you don't have errors with your indentation. So when your indentations are also not correct, when they don't align, maybe your indentation has to do with 4 spaces, but you're using 2 spaces. Let's look at an example here. I have tab error, inconsistent use of tabs and spaces in indentation. It's going to give you an error. So you have to watch your indentation. So after every column, you have a block of code following, and that block of code is usually indented. And it just tells you that based on whatever that you have after the column, these are what you want to do or what you want to have happen if the condition you stated equates to be true, or if the function that you've called, or if you call a function, or the function that you call is valid, you should get your response.
Yes, Jed, I think the indentation is one of the things that do frustrate a lot of people in Python. I just wanted to, maybe you can just give it, go through once now, just give it an explanation, and then let's see we have about 2 or 3, 4 loops within a particular area. How is the indentation going to be like, so that it doesn't frustrate some of the beginners?
All right, okay. All right. So 2 or 3, 4 loops. Okay. Just let's see. Let's change this. And it comes here. We want to have this 2. And 3. Let's have something else. Let's just use random. Random. Let's use. Hey, I've deleted something there. 1, 2. Okay. Okay, so like John said, the first thing was we call the first loop, right? Now this is our first loop. After the column, there should be an indentation. So all the code that we will write, we are to write, and after this column is going to be indented, meaning that those lines of code are what we want to do if this condition holds to be true, or they are the lines of code that we want to see executed after this line of code has been evaluated. Now, within this code, we want to have another for loop in that line of code. But we understand that with every for loop after the colon, there should be an indentation. So when we write the for loop again, it should indent. So the indentation should start after the beginning of your first line of code. So with this particular line of code, the indentation started after 4 lines, after the first line of code, which is the for over here. With the second for loop, our indentation started with 4 lines after the first line of code of the for loop of our second. It started after the first 4 spaces after for loop, our second for loop. Then the third is going to start after the first 4 spaces after our third for loop. So this is just random, and I'm not aware of what is printing. Yeah, so for example, the first one, it goes through this list, which is made up of 1, 2, 3. So the first time it goes through it prints 1. But once it goes through the first list, it is going to run it's going to run this whole for loop before it continues with the second value in this list. It's a lot. Yeah, let me just make it 2 for the meantime. So after printing 1, it is going to run all the codes in this second for loop, because Python is going to it runs your statements line by line, starting from the top. So we started from here, this first line of code, we came to print, and then it's going to take this line of code as one statement. So it's going to run this statement to the very end. So it's going to print out all of the statements within this fruits list. And then after it's done printing them, it's going to continue with the second item within the first for loop. So we have the first item printed out. It's printed out all the items within our second for loop, and then it went back to the second item within the first for loop, and then it went down to print all the items within the second for loop once again, before it came back to the third item in the first for loop. Then it went down to print all the items in the second for loop again. And it's going to do similar for this also. And because this for loop is local to this particular for loop, it's going to print the first statement here and print all the for loops in here. Then after printing the for loops in here, for each for loop in here, it is going to print all the for loops in here. So we are going through our first for loop, 1, 2, 3. We print the first, when we entered into ASD1, we print at our 1, this is it. Then we came to our second line of code. In here, we are saying that we have this fruits collection. We want to print each of the fruits, but because this for loop is seen as a unit of code, which should be run to completion before we run the second iteration, go to the second item within this list. It is going to exhaust all the loops in here. And because within this loop also, we are going to print an item. Then after printing it, we have another for loop in there. It is going to wait and print or exhaust all the for loops within this iteration before it continues with the second item, or the second, the third, the fourth within this item. And once it's done with exhausted all the for loops within the second, before it continues with the rest of the iterations in the first. My explanation is a little bit confusing, but basically what we wanted to make you get with this particular one is with the indentation, that after every column, you leave 4 spaces. So from this column, we left 4 spaces, and then we did an inner for loop again, and we are going to leave 4 spaces after the column, after our most immediate, we leave 4 spaces after our most immediate column. So these are most immediate column. You leave 4 spaces, your most immediate column. You leave 4 spaces from the beginning of that statement of the column. So that's with the indentation. So based on the number of conditions that you may have, you can have your indentation moving. You might have more nested loops. So this is what we call a nested loop. And you might have more nested loops. It also works similarly with your if conditions. You can have if. You can have something like this. So you can have something like this, and this is a nested if condition. So if 4 is greater than 2, you can ask it to do something, you can print 4, and then from there it's going to evaluate whether this is true. It's going to print. So okay, so the first condition is meant if 4 is greater than 2, it should print 4. If 2 is greater than 2, 2 is not greater than 2. It should be 2 greater than 1. Otherwise, it's not going to run the rest of the code. All right. So this condition was meant, so it's going to run all of the conditions, the statements in here, because the statements in here are seen as a unit, they are seen as a unit because they are within this one block of code, right? Now, if this condition is also true, all the conditions over here should run because they are seen as a block unit of code to this particular statement. And in doing so, it's going to run and evaluate this code. If everything is true, all of these statements are supposed to be evaluated because they are indented to this particular mother code. Then once evaluating this, if it is true, this line of code is going to be evaluated. So that's with nested if conditions, nested for loops, and the indentation. Indentation, standard-wise, we use 4 spaces after your most immediate column. You just give 4 spaces. All right. So if there are not any questions, or if there are questions, you can bring it on board. We answer it, then we bring the class to a close. Okay, so I think we've already answered our questions. I'm waiting for 1 more minute. If there are no questions, we can bring the class to a close. Okay, so since there are no questions, I think we can bring the class to a close. John, would you like to add anything before we close?
Please check the Q&A session.
Yeah, I've checked. Questions have been answered so far.
Okay, so I think that is fine for now. I just want to just echo the work that Jed has done. I think for today and yesterday and today, he has looked at a hello world of starting new Python applications. He has looked at variables, data types, and then he's done input and output. He's done the conditional statements. And then he has also looked at loops, for loops and all of that. He has also looked at list and indexing. He's also looked at functions. I think we did the dictionary the first day. And then today too, we also look at operators, the arithmetic operators, the comparison operators. We have also looked at logical operators. I think all those ones has been done. And then assignment operators too has also been done. Those ones also been done today. And which one? I think that's the so far the topics that we've done. I don't know whether Jed is there any other one.
Yeah, I think it's basically with the functions, even though I use them, we've not really want to explain how they are created and formed, but I've just used it in there just to explain the local, the global scope stuff.
So those who came late and those who are not able to grasp, I think these are the topics. So if there's anything that you want to learn on or do some extra things on, these are the areas that you can look at. And I think Jed may even put this school that he has done in the WhatsApp group so that you can go there and then practice it and then be able to figure out where you got it wrong, all of that. So I think that's all I have to say for today.
Yes, let me come in. So the recordings are at our YouTube channel. So you can see in the chat, we posted a YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Ghana Geospatial Society. You can go there, subscribe. You can see all the other recordings there. And the future recordings too will go there so that you can access and be able to revise accordingly. Thank you. So you can see it in the chat. youtube.com/Ghana Geospatial Society. You can go and subscribe there for all future recordings as well. And then the past ones will also be there.
Okay, Jed, is that you have anything to say again?
No, that's all from my end.
Okay, all right. So in that case, I think we thank you all for coming for this training. We will continue tomorrow at 7, where Jed is going to also continue with what he's doing. So thank you all for coming. We meet tomorrow 7.
Thank you. And Jed, will you share some documents soon?
Yeah, I'm going to share some documents.
Okay, so you share it in the WhatsApp group for members to access. So the WhatsApp link is also in the chat. Those who want to access it and follow it. Thanks.